Welcome to the Soft Network podcast. Today's guest, I'm not even sure who introduced me to him. It was several years ago, but he was one of those people within the community or closely in the community that I kept hearing about and people kept referencing. And then eventually somebody introduced us. He was somebody that definitely shared different people that we should pursue. To bring on as far as some of our clinicians. So he's been a huge help. And honestly, during this interview was the first time I got to meet him, and he did not disappoint. So without further ado, Dr. Jeremy Noble. Jeremy is a licensed psychologist who earned his Ph.D. in counseling psychology from the University of Southern Mississippi in 2014. Upon earning his degree, Jeremy joined the U.S. Army, spending his first 2 years in a clinical setting, providing psychological services for soldiers and consultation to their commanders. Jeremy then transitioned to be the command psychologist for the 75th Ranger Regiment from 2016 to 2021, where he engaged in personnel selection support, leader development programs, organizational interventions, team building activities, program improvement research, and clinical treatment for members of the Ranger Regiment. He obtained board certification in organizational and business consulting psychology from the American Board of Professional Psychology in 2021. Jeremy left the Army in 2022 to start his own organizational consulting company and currently resides in Alabama. I think you guys are going to get a ton out of this interview. Some behind the scenes types of conversations about what's going on for the command psychologist, what's it like in their development program. And also he's an individual that just retains and can share research like no one else. And so it was just an awesome interview. I learned a ton and can't wait for you guys to enjoy it. Without further ado, episode 2 on the Soft Network podcast, Dr. Jeremy Noble. All right, man. I think we're off and running. Jeremy, so thankful to have you come in. Today we've got Jeremy Noble. Jeremy, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Chris. Thanks for having me. So I'm Jeremy Noble. I was the regimental psychologist for the 75th Ranger Regiment between 2016 and 2021. A couple years after that, I got out of the Army and around 2022 timeframe, and I started my own consulting business, and so that's what I do right now. So I own Noble Organizational Consulting. I'm still involved with the military, so I still do government contract work, but my primary duties right now are more organizational consulting.
Now, for people and even myself, organizational consulting, organizational psych, what's your day-to-day look like?
Yeah, great question, because it kind of varies from day to day. So essentially what I do is I take and I apply psychology to organizations and businesses to help them, perform better. That can that can look like a couple different things. Probably the most common thing is personnel selection. Everyone who runs a business, just about everyone, they have people, that work for them, and with people, comes all the problems that human beings bring to the equation. So things like getting along with each other, or having the right skill set, for the job. So one of the things I would do for a company would be first help them identify what are the knowledge, skills, attributes, and abilities that they need upon entry into the organization. Maybe they need somebody who is going to be talking to clients or doing sales. They need to have like really good social skills, things like that. So I help them identify what those necessary components are. Then I help them measure those things. So if intelligence is a thing, we're gonna look at cognitive ability, or I mentioned extroversion maybe is something important. So I'll do a personality test and do an interview and then give them those results and help them make well-informed decisions about the people that they're trying to hire. So personnel selection is one. Leader development is another one. Gallup put out a book a few years ago called "It's the Manager." great book, lots of research, as you would imagine, from Gallup. One of the things they found with the book is that when you look at employee engagement, 70% of what makes an employee engaged comes from that employee's manager or leader. And so one of the things I do with leaders is executive coaching. Maybe they have a goal where they want to get to the next level as a leader. Maybe they're wanting to be more assertive, or they're wanting to figure out how to onboard people better. Whatever the goal is, very similar to therapy. It's just it's the same mechanism. It's helping people get from point A to point B. It's just a different problem set. I'll do team development. That's probably my favorite thing to do because it's just fun. You get a team of individuals that work together and sit down with them. And what I like to do the most with teams is personality tests, and then do like a group discussion on the results. That's a lot of fun because you'll have somebody who says, "Hey, my test says that I'm this, but I don't think I'm this way," and then the other people in the group will be like, "No, bro, you're exactly that way." So it's good for self-awareness, and it's also good when teams know each other better. And so there's that, and then there's a whole bunch of other like special projects. I like Robert Cialdini. He is kind of the leading expert on influence and persuasion, and he put out a couple of books. His latest one's called Persuasion, but there's 7 different principles on how to influence and persuade people. And some professions, they need to know how to adequately influence and persuade. And so I can come in and kind of teach them those 7 principles and work with them to implement them. So just kind of a whole host of things, but really you can narrow all of it down under the scope of I'm applying the science of psychology to help businesses improve their performance, however that looks.
Now, is this with consulting? Are you doing this nationally, and are you going to companies? Or are they shipping people to you? How's it work?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's nationally. I'm not doing anything international right now, and it's either virtual or I go to them. I prefer to go to them. I just, I told you before we started, I don't have a lot of luck with technology. So I just like being in front of somebody, like in person. It just feels more dynamic. It just feels more productive. It's that kind of, I'm sure you understand that kind of human element when you're sitting in the same room with somebody and you're actually connected with them. So usually like the big organizational projects, the team development stuff, I like to do that in person. Most of my one-on-one coaching sessions have been virtual, and that's just, I'm meeting with somebody once a week or once every 2 weeks. It's not feasible to travel and go do that, and that's fine. But yeah, it's national, a little bit of both.
I tell my students this. I'd be curious of your opinion. I think when I moved online, when we moved our practice online, the biggest difference I noticed, and I didn't really want to go. I mean, nobody wanted to go, but we actually did it right pre-pandemic. I noticed my skills needed to be better or sharper, and
Yeah.
I just needed to be a little bit more in tune
Yeah.
because of that element of not being in the room. And I'm curious for you if you've noticed anything like that in the consulting world.
Yeah, I personally do. I get a lot from nonverbals, and I've done coaching sessions just over the phone. And sometimes it's out of necessity. But I feel like I'm less effective when I just have voice, because I'm missing out on a bunch of data. I can't remember the name of the theory. You've probably heard when people say like 93% of communication is nonverbal. This was some research back, I think in like the 50s or 60s, but it's a study that came out that showed that when it's emotional information, that the majority of it is nonverbal. So tone of voice, body language is how you get communication or how you communicate. 7% is what's actually the words that are actually said, and and I fully buy into that, because like think of how many times when you remove the tone of voice and the body language and it's just text message, think of how many times people have misinterpreted what someone says or whatever. I think Key and Peele does a really good skit, on that. But Yeah. So, and me personally, I don't like talking on the phone, and I think it's for that reason. I feel like I don't know when to jump in, and so I don't know. I just feel like I'm not as effective. So when I do coaching, I prefer to do it video, or in person. And then, like I said, just out of necessity, if there's no other option, I'll do over the phone.
You got me thinking. So, in clinical work, there's theory, structural and strategic. And I remember in grad school, and I saw it play out quite a bit when I worked with families early in my career. But you talk about body language, you talk about the nonverbals. So, in structural and strategic, they talk about when you're working with families, like how a family comes into a session and where they sit.
Hmm.
Um, and so I'm curious, as you've worked with, different teams and things like that, are you ever looking at, how people physically present themselves, whether it's in a meeting or, how close they're sitting to you, and then
Yeah.
any of the dynamics of between, oh yeah, the boss is really, you know, doesn't work well with this guy right now, and I can see even physically
Yeah.
where they're at.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. So in like a team environment, let's say we're doing that personality feedback, that I talked about before, and let's say uh, one of the more quiet team members is actually speaking up. And let's say the boss says something or kind of talks over them or something like that, to where there's like a body language sort of element where that person shuts down. I will absolutely point that out, because I mean, that's the whole point of that whole discussion, is to kind of point out these things, these interactions that happen that are underneath the surface that people may not realize. Because they say that you don't want to hear from the people that talk the most in meetings. You want those quiet people to speak up, and as a boss, you want to create an environment where there is that psychological safety where people feel like they can speak up. Because if you don't have that, the company is going to go down a bad path and not realize it because you don't have those voices. I don't know Chris, if you're familiar with Amy Edmondson, any of her stuff on psychological safety.
Mm-mm.
Um, Highly recommend checking some of her work out. But psychological safety, the idea is that if someone feels psychologically safe in an environment, workplace or wherever, then they feel comfortable to speak up and share their opinion. Um, and they're not worried about ridicule or being chastised or fired or whatever. And the important thing about psychological safety is that when companies have more of that, they're more productive. So Edmondson, I think it was when she was in grad school, she did some research with some medical teams, and she wanted to see which teams made more medical errors, the ones that were more psychologically safe or the ones that were less psychologically safe. And so, let's hypothetically, let's just picture two different teams. So you have the ones that are really kind of cold, business oriented, like they come into work and it's all about work, and that's it. And maybe they're harsh, and then in terms of if like a nurse speaks up or whatever, the doctors may, assert their authority. Um, then take an environment that's the complete opposite. So a medical team that's just really warm. You go into their lobby, they've got pictures up of them doing like team building activities, and they're real kind of not family oriented, but they're cohesive. And they're people who, if like during a procedure a nurse speaks up, everybody listens because people have this kind of sense of collective ownership in the organization. So Edmondson found initially in her research that the team that was more psychologically safe made more medical mistakes. All right, I'm gonna say it again. So the team that was more psychologically safe made more mistakes. Well, then she dug into the data, and it wasn't that they were making more mistakes, it was that they were reporting more mistakes. So they
Mm-hmm.
felt safe when somebody messed up. They felt safe to raise their hand and say, "Hey guys, I screwed up. Let's fix this and let's figure out how to learn from this and not have it happen again."
Mm.
And so I think that's an important distinction, because the organizations that are less psychologically safe and they're more business oriented and they're more, they're a little more blunt, a little more harsh. It may seem like on the surface they're doing pretty well, but you have no idea what's being swept under the rug. Have no idea like how much self-preservation is happening with the employees at the expense of the company. And so kind of a tangent, but um, I'm very hypersensitive to signs of a lack of psychological safety when I'm working with organizations and teams, and I'll point that out, and I'll bring up the justification for it. And so if I'm working with a team and I'm seeing examples of where like the quiet people, the ones that have a lot of knowledge but they're not the spotlighters, that their voices are being blunted or stifled, then I may point that out, because I think that's something that's in terms of like return on investment. I think that's definitely an area for leaders to look at.
Yeah, as you say that, I'm thinking about through my attachment lens. If somebody's more calm, safe, right? Whether it's at home or work environment, I would assume that they're a little bit more creative. I mean, there's research that shows that the creative part of their brain is turned on. They're able to explore their world.
Yeah.
I would assume
Yeah.
that also plays at in the workplace with a team, which you're going to make more mistakes. But to your point, because maybe they're being a little bit more expressive or just creative, pushing boundaries, things like that. But at the same time, to your point, they're going to make mistakes, but they're going to own it,
Hmm.
because they're going to realize the importance of it. But the safety piece of like, hey, I can tell my boss, hey, I think I just screwed up. That makes a lot of sense.
Yep. And you just hit the nail on the head too, with the other benefit of psychological safety is innovation. When people, psychologically safe environments lead to innovation because people feel like they can take risks, and they're
Right.
calculated risks. They're risks, but in terms of product development or ideas or whatever, but they feel like they can speak up and share an idea that could be the thing that propels the company forward, versus the environments that are less safe. People are really just in self-preservation mode. They don't want to look embarrassed. They don't want to, raise their hand and risk losing their jobs. There's some really interesting stuff. This could be a hot topic, so brace
Go for
yourself,
it.
Chris. But there was some really interesting stuff that happened with when Twitter was bought by Elon Musk. There was some really interesting dynamic changes, or changes in the culture of the workplace. I mean, it went from like one end of the spectrum to the other overnight. But one of the interesting things that happened, and I have a colleague that was an employee there when this went down, so that's why I know this information. But one of the things that happened was at the beginning, people were looking busy. So they were putting things up on their computers to try to look like they were busy as the new managers were walking around, because they were scared to death that they were going to lose their jobs. And so they actually weren't productive. They
Mm.
actually were spending their time trying to look productive, which is fascinating because on the surface, the managers are walking around and they're like, oh yeah, like guys, people are really doing a lot of work, and our method is really working, but really underneath the surface it was not. So yeah, so anyway.
No, that makes complete sense, right? I mean, depending upon what you believe about the human brain, but I think research has shown the human brain works best when it's, you know, safe. I'll just use a really basic word. And it's interesting. So the workers don't feel safe. And so what do they spend their time on? Seeking safety. When in
Yep.
reality, if they knew they were safe, they're free to work, explore, create, push the bounds of whatever, niche they're in,
Yep.
because they know, hey, management's got my back and I can color outside the lines here.
Yeah. Yeah. A great example of that is Google. They they put out a book. Laszlo Bach was their HR head of HR, I believe. I forget what his official title was, but he put out a book called Work Rules, and it's phenomenal. I remember reading it. Honestly, I have a vivid memory of being on a treadmill in Bagram, Afghanistan, listening to the audiobook. And I remember like saying out loud, "Holy hell! Like how are we not doing this right now?" Like because it was it's that good. But one of the things that Google did was they would have a party for every failed initiative. And it wasn't like a passive aggressive kind of, let's make fun of Joe because but it was a legitimate celebration. Like, hey, you guys put yourself out there. You went for it and it failed, but so what? Like failure, you can't learn without failure. And so they viewed it as an opportunity to grow and to learn, and they reinforced this idea of taking these risks, these innovative risks. I think the example they used in the book was there was like I think they called it frugal. It was like it was like a way to search for like cheap things or something. I don't remember exactly what it was, but that was the example of one of the initiatives that failed. But they went for it, and then the company rewarded that, that innovation. So you talk about like psychological safety, like people are being reinforced for having these innovative ideas, and I mean, and look at Google, like look how well they've done, over the last, couple decades.
Yeah. I want to circle back. So you mentioned, correct me if I'm wrong, you mentioned assessment and selection.
Mhm.
How important now, I know is your job, but as an outsider, how important is that process for the community?
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, I think it's paramount. Um, because there's an interesting thing that happens, and when you say community, I'm assuming you're talking about soft community, right?
Yeah.
So there's an interesting thing that happens when it comes to individuals that come out of soft, or individuals that go to soft. That it is a special breed of human being, number one. But the product we get, it goes through a series of filtering, or filters. So right off the bat, it takes a special person to want to be to want to be a volunteer, or to volunteer for one of these units. So what are the 3-time volunteers? They're volunteering for the Army, volunteering for special operations, volunteering for an airborne, slot, jumping out of perfectly good airplanes. Um, so somebody who joins the Army, they're not just choosing to join the Army, or whatever branch of the military, they're choosing the most difficult route. And so you already have somebody who has a higher drive than most people. But that in itself is not enough. The special operations community has a specific set of roles and responsibilities that require somebody who is intelligent, who is not just driven and motivated, but they also are responsible. They have a strong sense of duty and responsibility. They're um, lots of inner motivation in terms of like self-discipline, that those types of things. And so um, so the filtering process that happens is there's the self-selection piece. So we already get a group of people that are kind of above the rest of the population. Then you have the rigorous selection events, all the physical events that require discipline to get yourself in the right kind of shape. That requires resilience to go through this stuff. Um, it's funny. We can talk about this later, but I always kind of wondered, like growing up, if I would be, uh, if I joined the military, if I could go like Green Beret Ranger or something like that. And I went the education route. I became a psychologist, and then I joined, and then I was fortunate enough to go to Ranger selection and be the Ranger psychologist. But when I was going through Ranger school, it was very clear to me, like that question was answered because I was the biggest soup sandwich you could imagine. If any of the listeners ever went to Ranger school with me, holy cow, man, it's a shocker that I actually made it through. But in terms of resilience, like there were folks in there with me, like guys from Ranger Regiment, that just, I mean, they're incredible individuals in terms of being able to go through hardship and be fine. And so you already get those attributes, uh, it, coming in the door. The ones that are, excuse me, the ones that are less resilient are the ones that kind of wash out. Then they all go through a psychological assessment where it's even further refinement of, is this the right person for the organization. So I'll tell you, for all SOF, I'm most familiar with Ranger Regiment, but for all SOF, average IQ is above average for the rest of the population. And I'll explain that a little bit, because there's a lot of misconceptions with IQ scores. You'll hear people say that, we were talking to Elon Musk earlier, people saying that his IQ is over 200, that his number doesn't even make sense. IQ scores are based on, it's normative. So 100 is average, and there's every 15 points is a standard deviation. So if you look up a normal curve, a bell curve, a normal distribution, The 50th percentile with Americans on our IQ tests is a 100. They score 100. And then when you get to 115, that's when you're in the 84th percentile. So if you score 115 on an IQ test, your IQ is higher than 84% of the rest of the population. Average individuals in SOF, average is around that 115 to 120 mark. And so it's a tighter distribution. So you have people who the average IQ is higher than the majority of the population. And then the above average in them are the ones that are in like the 130s, and they get really high, which I think Mensa, the high IQ club, 130 is the cutoff. 130 and higher is when you join Mensa, and so IQ is important in many ways. One, when you look at the research, it is one of the single best predictors of success in jobs. And I mean, it accounts for a very small percentage of the variance because human beings are complex and there's a lot of things that go into the recipe that makes someone successful. But IQ is one of the biggest chunks. And so you can't fake good on an IQ test. I mean, if you got a hold of the test and studied it, you could, but
Sure.
But essentially you can't, like, it doesn't matter how hard you try, you're not going to do better than what your abilities are. You can do worse if you sleep poorly the night before, whatever. Like you can fake bad and do poorly. So an IQ test is something that's extremely beneficial for us when it comes to selection in a software organization, because you are able to give data to hiring authorities and tell them that this is somebody who, compared to the people in your organization, their IQ is higher than 80% of them. And so this is somebody who, based on that, we know they have the ability to the cognitive ability to do the job. They have the mental horsepower to figure this out. And when I say cognitive ability, it's a range of things. But one of the things that falls into that is reaction speed and like processing, like cognitive processing. How quickly can you process information? Well, think about that in a combat context, or when you're going through and clearing a room, or you're doing a raid. Think about how important being able to process information is quickly, right? So you have people who, compared to the general population, they can process information better, than 90% of them, or whatever, that are going and doing this. So that right there gives us an edge over the enemy. And so IQ, one of the components. We have testing where we can see if somebody has struggles with resilience or anxiety. And I mentioned earlier that the selection process itself is a pretty good filter for like filtering out people that struggle with resilience, but not always. Sometimes they're able to kind of make it through, and we get somebody who, based on their genetic makeup, they are more at risk for developing a psychological disorder if they're exposed to trauma. And so you take somebody like that, and like, not only are you putting the unit at risk if you were to allow them to come into the organization, but you're putting them at risk too. Like, they could want to do this all day long, but if they're not the right fit for the organization, then it's going to cause, ethically, it could cause them harm, as well. And so, the theme today is going to be long-winded responses for me, Chris. So just a heads
You're
up.
good.
But you ask, like, how important is the personnel selection component? And I think it's probably one of the most important things that these units do. And I've heard commanders say this is the most important thing we do is hiring the right people. There's another book. This one's getting pretty dated. It's Good to Great by a guy named Jim Collins. I think it was like 2000, 2001 timeframe that he put this book out. There's a pet peeve of mine with books today where you have like talented writers that give their opinion, and there's no like research to back it. And I'm not going to name names, but I've got a few that really get under my skin. But the books that are based in research are the ones that get me excited, because you have like actual data and evidence to support the findings. And Jim Collins' book, Good to Great, is one of these books. He's a management researcher. He went and looked in organizations, and he asked what are the things that separate these great organizations and the ones that went from good to great and sustain this greatness. What are the things, the behaviors that they do that are different from the organizations that are more mediocre? And one of the things he found was that great organizations place an extraordinary amount of emphasis on getting the right people on the bus, the wrong people off, and the right people in the right seats. And so they very much focus on their selection process. And I'll tell you from experience and from research that hiring the wrong person in your organization is worse most of the time than not hiring somebody at all, because the wrong person is going to come in. They're going to take time away from the leaders because of all of the corrections and everything that's going to be made. They're going to hurt morale. They're going to potentially do damage through incompetence or whatever. And so all that to say, that I think personnel selection is one of the most important things that the community does. And so that's my response.
I want to jump over to the civilian side just for a second, because I got a follow-up question on the selection piece. If there's any businessmen, women, leaders listening, what are the 3 most important things when they're looking to hire somebody? I'm sure there's more than 3, but
Yep.
the 3 that jump out to you.
Yep. Humble, hungry, and smart. Those are the 3 things. Humility, I think, is the most underrated attribute out there. Adam Grant is an organizational psychologist that I'm a big fan of. He's written a few books. His first book was called Give and Take. And in that book, he outlined 4 types of people you have in the workplace. He put it on a quad chart. So you have people who are givers and takers. So givers are selfless, takers are selfish, and then you had people who are agreeable and people who are disagreeable. So it gives you 4 types of people. So you have your agreeable takers, which are your people who are they're nice to your face, but they do things for themselves, and so they're maybe doing stuff behind your back or whatever. You have your disagreeable takers, which are your selfish jerks, like your stereotypical villains. You don't want any of those in your organization. Then you had your agreeable givers, which are your nice people that are selfless, doing stuff for the organization. The problem with these people is they have poor boundaries and they're not very assertive and they kind of get walked all over. And then you have your disagreeable givers. So these are people who they'll speak up and disagree, but their heart's always in the right place. They're always doing it for the good of the organization. Anytime I think of a disagreeable giver, I think of like a Ranger NCO. Like I think like these guys are the quintessential disagreeable givers. They are not afraid to speak up and be direct, but their heart is always in the right place. They're always doing things for the good of the organization. I mentioned humility. That is humility, selflessness, in my opinion. You're doing things for the organization. I met with a Ranger leader. I would mention his name, but I don't want to, I haven't gotten permission from him, so I'll just tell you what he said. But I had coffee with him earlier this week. Phenomenal leader, well-respected guy. Like people absolutely love him. And one of the things he said to me was, serving in an organization like Ranger Regiment, on your worst day, you should be 51% for the regiment, 51% for the organization on your worst day. The problem with people who lack humility, people who are more selfish, is on their best day, they're 49%. For the organization. And so so the culture there, and to me, the thing that makes the culture so great, and I think this applies to other soft units too, I just have more experience with Ranger Regiment, is that there's this like unquenchable thirst to better the organization. And everything is in the vein of benefiting the organization. So there's that humility piece. Also, I mentioned good to great earlier with Jim Collins and looking at organizations and what factors made them great. One of the other factors, in addition to making sure you have the right people on the bus, was they had what he called level 5 leaders that were in charge of the organization. And a level 5 leader is someone who has a paradoxical blend between professional will, so that drive, but also personal humility. And so when good things happen, that leader looked out the window and gave credit to the subordinates. When bad things happened, that leader looked in the mirror and took ownership of the bad things. I'll take humility a step further. So sent out a survey within the community years ago and asked, think about the best, it was a field grade leader, but think about the best field grade leader you've ever had and tell me what made them the best, and think about the worst field grade leader you've ever had and what made them the worst. This was in the name of personnel selection. We were wanting to better hone our assessment process. One of the number one things that popped out for the best leader was humility. The subordinates, the best leaders they ever had were humble, selfless individuals. The traits that came out on the worst side were the ones that were kissing up and kicking down. They were afraid to bring bad news to the boss. They had a fragile ego. That you can probably populate the rest of the list based on your own experiences with folks, I'm sure. So humble is the thing that I would mention first right off the bat. Hungry is the second one, and hungry, is more being motivated, more having this drive. And I kind of lump two personality traits together to make up hungry. One of them is extroversion, but when I say extroversion, I don't mean extroversion in the sense of you wanting to be around people. I mean extroversion in the sense of being energetic, being assertive, seeking stimulation. A lot of people forget that extroversion has both energy and how much you prefer company within it. So that the former of the sub traits within extroversion, that energetic piece, that's important. And then the other trait is conscientiousness. And so like how achievement oriented you are, how much self-discipline you have. Those two pieces together, I think, make up the hunger piece. And I mentioned earlier that one of the best predictors of success was intelligence. Another significant predictor it's a little further down the list, but still significant, is conscientiousness. And then the last one is smart. And, I've already talked about my opinions on IQ, but I think it's important. I've got some, I could share some examples, but of like how low IQ has played out in the workplace, but probably not a good idea in this, in this venue.
No, you're
because
good.
they were more in like a clinical setting, like I would be like when I was in the Army, I'd get like a command directed evaluation where, commander has a soldier they think is harming themselves or that they want to determine their fitness for duty. They'd send them to us. We'd evaluate. And I've had a few examples of soldiers that like when I talked to them and I realized it wasn't that they were trying to hurt themselves. It was like an accidental thing due to poor intelligence, the lower ability to think in second, third order effects and stuff. So I've seen it play out pretty poorly in the workplace. And I've also seen it like high IQ play out really well. So yeah.
No, I was just going to reiterate. I think for individuals that aren't close to the community or wonder, something when I started seeing clients clinically from the soft community, I can remember my wife's a clinician as well, chatting with her like, and these guys are really smart, like much quicker than the average bear. And I love hearing that research to kind of back it up. But yeah, for anybody out there just thinking, these guys are big, strong, fast guys, they're also really intelligent along the way. I wanted to come back to that assessment piece. So as a clinician, obviously, we're going to see the tails, like the people that come see us maybe worse off than others, right? And so I'm curious about a couple of things. One, this is just anecdotal, but in my opinion, I think the ones that experience some level of childhood trauma are actually set up to be more successful, or maybe not more successful, but having a I don't want to say easier, but maybe an easier time once they get in the military to eventually end up in SOF. Obviously, if they have the IQ and the physical ability, but their ability to be resilient obviously is kind of already baked in.
Yeah.
And that's just something I see. But going back to the assessment piece, I guess my question is are you guys, and maybe you can't disclose, but if somebody has a previous trauma, is that like a hard stop? And okay,
No,
okay,
no, it's not. And I kind of think of it along the same lines that as you is if you've been through some tough stuff early on in life, like trauma or whatever, and you're here, like you're assessing for one of these organizations, and you're making it through the physical events, and you're doing well. I mean, that's a positive thing in
yeah,
in terms of those are strengths. This is a resilient person, and here's data to back how he or she is resilient. I think that's probably better than when I get like like a 22-year-old lieutenant who has done well in life, but has never failed because they've never been through any kind of adversity. And it's hard for me to in terms of making recommendations. I mean, my recommendation is just, hey, here's the data we have. I don't see any risk here. However, the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior, and like I don't have much to sink my teeth in on because there's not a whole lot, with
yeah.
in his or her background. So yeah, I think somebody who comes from a pretty rough background, in terms of like trauma or whatever. I mean, I've interviewed thousands of people, and there are some that I mean, they've been homeless. They've have parents that are incarcerated for life sentences, and they've been able to figure out how to get out of those situations and actually be very successful. And I think I mean, it's impressive, number one, but I think that speaks to resilience. That speaks to the fact that like this person's going to be good in when they go through ranger school or any of the trainings or whatever. They're going to be fine. I've interviewed one guy who similar kind of setup, like he was homeless. He was like sleeping in dumpsters to try to stay warm growing up. And I remember asking him this selection event he was in. They had gone out to the field, and it's a rough, like they're getting pulled out of their sleeping bags by cadre at 2 a.m. and when it's 30 degrees and stuff. And I asked him, I was like, how's this going? He's like, oh man, this is easy, because he's used to worse. Like he's good. Like he's getting fed. He's got a place to, he's got a sleeping bag. So yeah, I mean, all that to say, I think it's a benefit more than a drawback in the selection environment.
With your current endeavor with organizational, you mentioned, or I'm assuming, do you work with a team, or is it just you?
It's just me.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just me. I left the Army, like I said, 2022, moved down to Opelika, Alabama, so I'm just north of Fort Benning, and just kind of took a knee for like a month or two just to kind of figure things out, like figure out what I wanted to do next, and started an LLC, and so it's just me, and I kind of have a high need for like variety and stimulation, and so like I said, I get to do government contract work and kind of travel around and do that. I get to pick up some executive coaching clients. I'm getting ready to send out a bunch of marketing boxes to some local businesses to introduce myself and see if anybody has any unique problems that they want help with and stuff. So it's yeah, but I mean it's just me right now. I keep thinking about growing, and I think it's in the cards in the future, but no, right now it's just me. I'm in a I'm in my rented office, right now, talking to you.
Take us back. Where'd you grow up? Give us a little
Yeah,
bit of the background and how you ended up in the military.
yeah. So I grew up in Mobile, Alabama. I really come from Satsuma. Nobody knows where Satsuma is, so I say Mobile. So Satsuma is like North Mobile County. It's named Satsuma because there was a bunch of Satsuma trees there at one time, and then this pest called the citrus canker came in and just wiped them all out. And so I'm from Satsuma, but I never saw a Satsuma until I was an adult, which is kind of funny. But so grew up there. Never really left there, in terms of seeing the world or traveling or anything. I went to the University of Southern Mississippi for college, and I stayed there for grad school. And so I got my Ph.D. in counseling psychology from there. Um, in terms of, I mentioned earlier, hunger and stuff being important. I wasn't a good student. Like I wasn't very hungry in school. Like undergrad, going into my junior year, I think I had like a 2.4 GPA. Like it was bad. And I applied to a bunch of grad programs. Well, I realized that, okay, I can't do anything with a bachelor's in psychology, number one. And if I'm going to get into grad school, I need to get my GPA up and, figure something out. And so um, I ended up pulling it up over a 3, just barely, and applied to a bunch of grad programs, and I only got into one, and that was at Southern Miss. But once I got into
Time
grad,
frame? What year is this?
so I started undergrad in 2005, graduated in 2009,
Okay.
and started grad school in 2009.
Okay.
And once I got into grad school, then all of a sudden I had my direction and my purpose, and I really enjoyed it. It was the first time in my life I enjoyed school, and because I was really learning, and it was hands on, and it was great. So um, did pretty well, in grad school, and was going to go in academia. I'm a big fan of research, and I remember an Air Force recruiter came and talked to us about internships with the Air Force. And I'll back up. So for those who don't know, to get your doctorate in either clinical or counseling psychology, you have to do what's called a pre-doctoral internship. And there's this match kind of system where you go and you apply to all these programs. They rank order the applicants that they want. You rank order the sites that you want, and then there's an algorithm that matches you together. At the time, only like 50% of the people that were applying were actually matching. And the problem with that is that if you don't match, you get another year to try, and if you don't match that second time, then you're done. Like you're not getting your degree. At least that was my understanding at the time. So we're all looking at internships at that time, and everybody's anxious and stuff. And so this Air Force recruiter comes in and he starts talking about internships with the Air Force, and I had never even considered military psychology. I didn't even know it was a thing. And as a kid, I was always kind of interested in the military. I just didn't go that route. I went to college, and so I got excited, decided to apply to the Air Force, and somebody who was currently serving in the Army, a psychologist who came from my program, was coming back to defend his dissertation, and sent an email out and said, "Hey, if anyone wants to hear about Army psychology, I'd be happy to talk to him." And so I decided to talk to him. His name's Matt Gelker, and met with him in a Starbucks. And the first thing he said to me, he's like, "I hear you're thinking of joining the Air Force." And I said, "Yeah." And he's like, "All right, I'm about to talk you out of the Air Force into the Army." And he actually succeeded, because he told me about what's called operational psychology, which is pretty much what I do with organizations, but applied to the special operations community. And he told me about operational psychology, told me about Ranger Regiment, and I mentioned earlier, I've always been interested in exciting kind of things. I've always kind of craved stimulation, and always been into fitness and stuff too. And the more I heard about it, the more I was like, man, this could be a good fit. Like I like the discipline of the military. I like the physical fitness aspect, and so I applied to Army sites too, and I ended up matching with an Army site up at Joint Base Lewis McChord, and so I went there in 2013 and did internship, and then there was a postdoc residency in called the COPPER program, the Clinical and Operational Psychology Residency Program at Fort Bragg. And I applied for that, got it, and then went and PCS'd over to Fort Bragg in 2015 timeframe. And so that was my introduction to operational psychology. So I got to go and observe SFAS, Special Forces Assessment Selection, like what the psychs do with that. I got to see a lot of like the performance enhancement stuff that the psychs do, like going out and like watching training events and giving feedback and stuff. And so it was really interesting. I really enjoyed it. I got to go through SEER school as a resident, and I know your listeners are all probably familiar with SEER school, so probably don't need to break that down. But as a psychologist going through SEER school, that was pretty fascinating.
That would be cool.
Yeah, it was pretty wild. I hallucinated in SEER school, and so that was fun as a psychologist.
From being up too much or what?
Yeah, sleep deprivation. Yeah. I remember sitting in one of the cells and looking at the wall and seeing like greenery growing out of the wall, and I knew what was going on, and I was really
that's the trip.
Really
it's like knowing it.
Yeah. I was like, this is incredible. And there were some moments, like there was one moment where I'm just kind of standing there like a zombie, zoned out, and I look up at this block wall and I see like numbers, and I'm like, oh, is this a code? And then it hits me, I'm hallucinating, which was wild. But I got to go through SEER school, and experience that. And and then I was fortunate enough to run into the right people and got connected with the at the time the regimental psychologist for the Ranger Regiment. And then I went out to RASP, Ranger Assessment Selection, and that was in October of 2015. And like I said, like I told the board, I remember telling the board when I went in front of them, like, I wouldn't hire me at this point because I just barely squeaked through. That was one of those moments I told you earlier. It was like clear to me that I don't belong, in terms of like physically. Even, in terms of a resilience perspective, like these guys were just heads above me. Like I remember, when we do our PT test with the hospital, I was attached to the hospital, at Fort Bragg, and we do our PT test. And I remember being like towards the front of the pack, and I remember going to RASP and I was dead last. I was literally the last person to finish the run. But yeah, so I was fortunate enough to pass RASP. And
hold on,
PC.
For everybody, you have to go through it, or you got to go through it.
You have to.
RASP.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's the beauty of the 75th Ranger Regiment, is that everybody that's a part of that organization goes through the same selection.
That's super interesting. Was that the same rationale for SEER school, or they just, if you're going to be a psych, they want you to have that experience?
Yeah. So for SEER school, the rationale is in order to be a SEER psychologist, a SEER qualified psychologist, which SEER school, they have to have a psychologist there for oversight. So a psychologist is always on the ground in the background at SEER school. And it's for a number of reasons, but the big reason is if you're familiar with Philip Zimbardo's Stanford Prison experiment,
mm-hmm.
Where he demonstrated behavioral drift. And so real quick for your listeners, Stanford Prison experiment, Zimbardo wanted to see it like there. I think at the time there was a lot of prison guard brutality that was happening across the U.S. and he wanted to see, is this dispositional? Like, are these just people who are prison guards who are just bad people, or is this environmental? And so he made a fake prison in the basement of the psychology building in Stanford. And he brought in these participants, and these are people that volunteered to be a part of this study. They like answered an ad in a paper, and it was a great. I think it was a great study. There's some controversy around it, but like they rolled up to people's houses in squad cars and picked them up and took them to the precinct and booked them, and then they took them to the basement and put them in jail, And so he randomly assigned people as prisoners and prison guards, and he told the prison guards, like, do whatever is necessary to keep peace. And then he just observed. And there was like a prisoner revolt initially, and the first step of behavioral drift happening was one of the prison guards grabbed a fire extinguisher and pulled the pin and sprayed it on some of the prisoners. And like you imagine, like CO2 hitting you, your bare skin, and it went from there, and it quickly turned into something that was unethical. So they started restricting like food and bathroom privileges. It was getting bad to the point where Zimbardo himself got pulled into it. He was like the warden, and there was a participant who said, I don't want to do this anymore. I want to quit. And so they took the participant to the warden, and Zimbardo, like, if you know anything about research and getting like IRB, institutional review board approval, like if a participant needs to be able to quit at any point in time. This participant said, I want to quit, and Zimbardo said, nah, he's faking, take him back. and the dude like lost his mind, as you could imagine. And so he brought in a colleague that he wanted to show her what he was doing, and she was like, what are you doing? You've got to stop this right now. And it kind of pulled him out of it. And the experiment was supposed to go like 13 days, and this was day 6, and they cut it off. They stopped it, because things had gotten too abusive. And so the rationale behind having a psychologist at SEER school is that you have to have somebody there for oversight when you have cadre who are in these prison guard roles. And so to be a psychologist there, you have to go through it. And so that was the rationale. So as a resident for operational psychology, we were going through all the trainings to get spun up to be qualified operational psychologist, and being a SEER psychologist was one of those things. And there's other pieces to SEER or to being a SEER psychologist other than just being at the schoolhouse. Like if we have a prisoner of war that is rescued, then there's like a repatriation process, and a psychologist is involved there too. So there's multiple pieces to it, but the bottom line is, to be SEER qualified to do any of this stuff, you have to go through SEER school. And so that was why I did that as a resident. Ranger Regiment, their culture is everybody that wears a tan beret is a ranger, meaning they all go through the same stuff. And so every person, so we'll take RASP 2, for example. RASP 2 is their selection program for senior enlisted, so E6 and higher, and then all officers and warrant officers as well. So they all go through this. So we'll have a RASP class of like 30 people. Well, you have a mixture of, you have infantry folks, you can have military intelligence folks, you can have psychologists, or cooks or whatever. Like you have every MOS that wants to come and serve in the Ranger Regiment or that the organization needs. They're all passing Ranger standards. They're going through the field exercise. They're holding up to the same, standards in terms of their leadership abilities and being, like earlier I mentioned, the humble, hungry, smart. Like they're all, it's all on a even playing field for the most part. I mean, there's some nuance with some of the, like you don't need a cook that's got a 130 IQ, right?
Might help.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, it could. Yeah, I got an example of a cook with really low IQ that worked out really poorly. But like I said, I don't want to share that one. But
the dynamic, the fact that you guys, I had no idea. I learned something. That's awesome. The fact that you guys go through that piece, I'm curious, like, what's the dynamic with obviously the service member, with them knowing or having gone through it, side by side?
Yeah. I think it's, I think you have a lot more buy-in with them later than you would otherwise. I've got guys that I went through RASP to that that they feel like, I feel like after going through that process, I feel like they're like family, if that makes sense. That might seem like a little hyperbolic, but like there's a closeness there, there's a familiarity there that I don't have with other people, and I think the feeling is mutual. And the nice thing about being a Ranger psychologist in Ranger Regiment is that I think there is a huge removal of a barrier to treatment because of that.
Absolutely.
I can't tell you how many times I've had guys when I was in the seat hit me up on we have like instant messenger Skype, on our computers at work. They'd hit me up on Skype because they could search my name and be like, "Hey, sir, I'm really worried about a buddy of mine, and let me tell you why." And I can't tell you how many times Rangers have like walked in a Ranger buddy because they were worried that they were gonna complete suicide or whatever they were concerned about. And so guys reaching out to me because there's that sort of familiarity, there's that buy-in, like this guy's a Ranger too, and so he understands. I think is huge. Yeah.
Yeah, just thinking through that dynamic, I would imagine their knowledge of your suffering going through that selection process,
Yeah.
The trust, as you mentioned, reduction of barrier, there's something about, this, like there's something about, you probably know the research tied to it. I'm just, I don't know, but there's something tied to working with somebody when you know their tolerance of stress or their tolerance of suffering.
Yeah.
When you see that, when you experience that, there's a level of knowing them that is just, it relaxes you. Going back to that workspace and
Yeah.
the ability to have safety with that individual.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. That's
So
exactly right.
why don't the other selection or the other branches, and maybe a couple of them do, again, brand new knowledge to me, do any of them do this outside of the Ranger community?
Yeah, a few of them. 160th
Okay.
does this.
Okay.
160th SOAR, they'll do it. The groups have like support folks, and at one time, I don't know if this is still the case. At one time, the folks were just DA selected, they're just assigned to the groups. I know a lot of them are doing like support selections now, but it's different. I mean, and you can make an argument for either side. The problem, the reason why not everybody does this is that Ranger Regiment is in a constant manning crisis. They are constantly struggling to fill a lot of these low density jobs because you think about it, not everybody can. Let me back up. So I mentioned like the filtering earlier. The folks that go to be operators, I mean, these are like physically aggressive, usually physically fit, resilient individuals that go to these, and they pick like infantry positions and or as their MOS. But you get people like psychologists who, like a lot of us join the field of psychology because like we want to help people, and we're a little closer to the leaf eater side of the house, than some of
Sunshine
these
and
other folks.
rainbows.
Yeah, exactly, right. Being vulnerable, and so it's not natural for a lot of us to fit with the culture of a place like Ranger Regiment or one of the groups or whatever. And so there's just a smaller pool to pull from. And you get that with other positions too, especially the ones that are more niche. So there's that piece that's a struggle. So can they physically do it is one part. And I was at Ranger Regiment for almost 6 years, and I was told that I couldn't leave until I found my replacement. And that was, well, I was going to say that was why I was there for so long. It really wasn't. Like I was loving the job, and I didn't want to leave. But it's also true that it's hard to find somebody to backfill you in a place like that because of the physical piece. Like Ranger standards in terms of physical fitness are above the rest of the Army, and it's one standard for everybody. Age, gender, doesn't matter. Same standard for everybody. And so it just makes it harder to recruit people. So you've got the physical fitness piece is one barrier. Another barrier, I mentioned intelligence earlier. You said earlier, you guys, working with people from the soft community, you're kind of struck at like that these guys are smart. Like the stereotype would say they're not, but they are. Um, if we were to hire like an MD, like a medical doctor, with an average IQ, Rangers are going to walk all over them, because Rangers will absolutely tell you when you're wrong or when something doesn't check out. And if you don't have the cognitive ability to keep up with them, you're not going to work. And so we have to have people in some of these like helping positions or support positions that have the cognitive ability to keep up. And then the last piece is probably a little harder in some MOSs, like psychologists, but it's not being a weirdo, socially. Um, you know, and you know what I'm talking about, Chris. Like, there's a lot of folks in our field that are just a little bit odd socially, and
Why do you think that is? Just out of curiosity.
Man, I don't know. That's a good question. They say people join or people go into the field of psychology for one of two reasons. Either they are trying to figure out other people, or they're trying to figure themselves out. And I think I think the latter is the ones that tend to be a little more awkward. I don't know. I feel like that statement's going to come back to bite me, but yeah. So you have to be socially intelligent. And if you're not, again, like they're not going to use you. They're going to figure out a way to go around you, or you're just going to be rendered ineffective. And then you're just taking up air. You're just taking up space. So finding that trifecta in the infantry world is easy, but finding it in like the medical world or whatever is not. And so it's just hard. And the thing that I love about the Ranger Regiment is they will always prioritize the organization and the standard. You'll hear them say the standard is the standard is the standard. And so that's one piece that makes the organization great, is you got everybody who's there is on a even flat sort of not hierarchy, but everybody's respected. Everybody's a Ranger, regardless of your MOS. But the other edge to that sword is that it's really, really hard to find these folks, and so as a result, you're always kind of undermanned. That would be my guess as to why some of the other organizations, especially the bigger organizations, why they don't do this.
Going back to grad school and then your pairing or matching, how much clinical work were you guys doing once you guys got matched? Was it all clinical?
It was all clinical. Yeah. At first, when I was up at JBLM, that was purely it. An internship with psychology is you're practicing as a psychologist under the supervision of other psychologists, and it was a clinical internship. And so I did a 6 months, so it's a year-long internship. I went to BOLIC first, which basic officer leadership course down in San Antonio, and then started officially in like September of 2013, I guess. Started doing clinical work, and so I had like a neuropsych rotation, I had a health psych rotation, and then I did like an outpatient clinic rotation, and that was that year. And then the postdoc was half the year was operational psychology, the other half the year was clinical. And so I was in the hospital. I was doing chapter evaluations, like specialty schools. So if people want to go to recruiter school, they had to get like a psych eval. I carried caseload. You doing therapy? I did group. I did neuropsych evals, and when I went to Ranger Regiment, I most of my job was to run RASP, like run the psych portion of our selection, which was every month. And And then I would do like performance enhancement stuff. I would do like research projects, but those were kind of always in like in the background. At the time, we were in Afghanistan, and I was going forward twice a year for about a month each time for like very specific reasons. And then I was managing our behavioral health clinic, and so I had a staff of behavioral health providers, and I would oversee them, and I also would carry a small caseload, or I would do very specific like command directed evaluations or usually evals. But it it was irresponsible for me to carry a large caseload because I wasn't there enough to provide good treatment. Like I was gone 60% of the time, and so as much as I wanted to, it was inappropriate, for me to do that. You actually reminded me of something that I was going to bring up earlier. So you were talking about the importance of the trust that rangers would have to come and see folks that understand them. Well, when I was down there, maybe it'll help to kind of lay out the background here. So medical care in the Army is at the time was under MedCom, and so the behavioral health treatment that was done on Fort Benning, Georgia, was under a behavioral health chief at on Fort Benning, and so he was responsible for making sure that people are abiding by what the medical command says treatment should be. Ranger Clinic was a little bit weird because like we're in our own footprint, we're doing our own thing. Well, this individual for some reason thought that the Ranger Clinic shouldn't exist, that it should be absorbed by the embedded behavioral health clinic on post, which is an oxymoron. Like embedded means embedded in the unit, and so this was a central location on post. Like that's not an embedded clinic. And so I had a problem with that, rightfully so. And I said, no, we're not going to do that. And he fought me on this to the point where we ended up in the office of the hospital commander. And fortunately, the hospital commander was a former 160th surgeon. And the first thing he said was, wait a minute, you want to take resources from the Ranger Regiment? He's like, Ranger Regiment's the tip of the spear. Like that doesn't make any sense. And he squashed it. But my justification at the time was, number one, regulations state that the embedded behavioral health clinic must be within walking distance for these individuals, and this would make it not that way. And then when it comes to like prolonged exposure therapy, prolonged exposure therapy being like you're asking an individual with PTSD to recall in a detailed manner the nature of their traumatic event. These guys have top secret security clearances. They're doing things that they can't really talk about. But when you have providers like myself, who also has a TSSCI, who's been there, who's been to Afghanistan, who understands exactly what they're doing, treatment's going to be more effective. They're going to be more comfortable sharing the details of the mission or whatever with me because they understand that it's not going to go anywhere. They understand that the building that we're in is a secure building. It's very different than if they're going to go to another location and talk to somebody that they don't know, who also, by the way, is completely overbooked, who is only able to get them in. Like their wait time is like a month out. It just didn't make any sense. And so anyway, so I bring that up because I think cultural competence to a community like this is extremely important, because if you don't have that, then I think the members of this community are gonna suffer, because what they're gonna do is they're just not gonna seek treatment. And yeah, I could go on for that for days.
No, I'm
There's
with you.
few people in this world that I would like fight, and this person I would like to fight him. You know, And if he's listening and he wants to make it happen, you can put my contact info up. Another statement that's probably gonna get me in trouble.
No, I love it. That cultural competency piece, I know as a civilian that over the last 10 years has, slowly started working with individuals more and more and learning more and more. It's part of the reason we built Soft Network, is there's clinicians out there that have worked on the government side and now retired. And it's like this cultural competency piece, you can't, it's so valuable. And for individuals that have been inside the organization, why would we not highlight that and try and get them as accessible as possible in the different states that they're in? And obviously, we're having national licenses roll out soon. So, something I wanted to ask on that. So, I think Leidos has the government contract right now. Is that accurate?
I don't
For
know.
behavioral health clinicians that are not active duty, social workers or psychologists.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard numerous stories of individuals that maybe their wife was the embed, an LCSW or whatever, and the guys trusted, the wife because they worked with the husband. And she worked with Leidos, and basically whenever he PCS, she would go with him. But inevitably she would leave Leidos, and maybe I shouldn't say Leidos, whoever had the government contract. I was just using their name as an example. I know there's other government contract companies, but they'd slide in an individual. Do you know, like, do those people that are coming into soft units, do they have any training or cultural competency development for those units? I don't know if you can speak to that or not, but I'd be curious if you can.
Yeah. I think I think the answer is it depends. It depends on the situation and who it is. A lot of times, so I've been in the position where I've hired folks for those positions. And fortunately at like Ranger Regiment, we would have the position from the contract company, but we would interview the people that are going to be in the position. So it was never a situation where the contract company is just sending us somebody and that was
Okay.
that. Yeah, we would raise a stink about that if that were the case. But I'm trying to think through the clinicians I've hired over the years, and I would say the majority of them have no background in this. And what we would do is we would spend as much time as we could in the onboarding process trying to help them understand like Ranger culture and but there's only so much you can do to like really help them truly understand the depth of what it means to be an operator or to work in this community. Now the ones that have stuck around, they figure it out after a while, and then they're good. And I've had some providers, like I'm thinking of one in particular who she had no experience in SOF, and she came in, and our Rangers loved her, and she did an incredible job. But yeah, I don't think I have a real good answer for you, Chris. But we also when we saw somebody who Rangers liked, like that. There's one guy in particular I'm thinking of. He was working in a different clinic on post and was not affiliated with Ranger Regiment, but was affiliated with the hospital. And Rangers were getting referred to him for different reasons, and they loved him, and we heard good things, and so we were able to poach him. Like we were able to grab
Nice.
him and bring him over, and he worked for us for a little bit, and from what I understand, did a good job. But I think that was a case where he had developed Ranger competence through just having repetitions with Rangers who were referred to him, and so we brought him in, and he already understood the community. So that was nice. I have seen situations where people served in the unit, and when they retired, they got their like social worker degree or became like a master's level counselor or whatever, and they came back and like those guys are usually awesome. Like those guys,
Yeah.
we pull them right in, and man, they crush it. I'm thinking of one in particular up in with our one of our battalions, our outlying battalions, who did a good job. But yeah, I don't know if I'm directly answering what you're
No, yeah,
asking,
yeah.
but that was what came to mind.
That's helpful. What do you think are some of the biggest barriers right now for individuals leaving the community or have left the community to get help?
Yeah. Um, yeah. So, I mean, I think we talked about one of them at the beginning before we hit record. Is that there's a ton of helpful organizations out there. It's just kind of having a central location and knowing like where to go, or knowing what resources are out there. I see that as a bit of a barrier. I'll tell you where my mind went first was um, I don't know if you're familiar with self-determination theory. Ryan and Deci, I think, are the authors that came up with that. It's like a theory on human motivation. It's like 5 mini theories within one, but one of the ones that has always stuck with me from that theory is that they say that human beings have 3 basic psychological needs. They need autonomy, they need mastery, sort of like get better at something, and they need relatedness to be part of like a tribe. And the beauty of a place like one of these soft units is when guys join, they have more autonomy than they would have in other places. So there's that. There's the big boy rules kind of piece. But the other 2 are like maximized. So the mastery piece is, I mean, it is fed to the max. Like they come in an organization like Ranger Regiment, for example, they have a clear structure of working up the hierarchy in terms of like an infantry enlisted comes in, they got to go to Ranger school, they get their tab. All right, now they're a tab spec 4. They're going to go and the next stage is to be a squad leader or whatever. They work all the way up to where they're a first sergeant, and then maybe they're a CSM, and it is clear stages of growth and development. And then the relatedness piece, like there is no more defined culture than a place like the Ranger Regiment. You got everybody wears the tan beret. Like I told you before, like everybody's a Ranger. Everybody goes through the same selection process. There's mutual respect. You have your scroll, usually on both sleeves. Like you're all kind of part of this organization. You got the Ranger Creed. You go to a Ranger footprint at 6 or 6:30 in the morning, and you're going to see guys getting after it across the whole footprint. Like it is the culture is clear, and one of my favorite things to do is when I get to when I would get to work early, and I'd hear like the formations of Rangers just screaming the Ranger Creed, because they'd be in formation and they'd recite it and hear it echo across Fort Benning. I mean, that's something that'll give you chills. Like it's a incredibly defined culture, and that works. And so when you leave, those things are stripped, like they're gone. You get out of the military, and now there's no clear structure and there's no clear path of like how to grow. You've been removed from your tribe. Now you're alone, and now you have an existential identity crisis. Now you don't know who are you? And Interestingly, I was only at regiment for 6 years, and I experienced that. When I got out of the Army, my first, I told you earlier, I told myself, all right, I'm going to take a knee deliberately for a month and just relax. And I was going to say something that's probably insensitive. I was going to say that was a dark month, not compared to what folks experience, right? Like I was sleeping in, and I'd go to the gym, and mid morning, and then before I knew it, it was like in the afternoon, and I just didn't feel like I had anything accomplished, right? But I had moments where I was like, man, like I didn't feel like I had worth and value, because I'm just by myself, now. And the way that I fixed it is, I started re-implementing that structure, started getting up early. I rented an office where I'm getting out of the house, and I'm like working, like I'm putting this deliberate structure in place and these gates of accomplishment and all that stuff, and and then have been good. But anyway, all that to say, like, these folks are leaving this great organization, and they're leaving it at a young age because either they're medically retiring, or they're retiring at like 40, or 38 or whatever, and they've got a whole other life ahead of them. And I think it's a recipe for depression. I think they can get in a situation where they don't feel a sense of accomplishment, they don't feel a sense of worth, they feel isolated and alone, and then they go down the road of like, why I'm like, they feel guilt for feeling what they do, and they start to isolate more, and um, and so I guess all that to say, like, you asked about barriers. I don't know if I necessarily answered your question in terms of barriers, but I feel like that's a common problem with folks that are getting out. And I think the barrier in that is them feeling like this diminished sense of self-worth, and this sense that they shouldn't feel this way, and like refusing or not even considering going and seeking treatment to kind of help them get back on their feet. Because I mean, what treatment's going to do, and you know this better than I do, Chris, is that treatment's going to help them, like counseling is going to help them identify what those values are, and then how they can align their behaviors with those values again. They had it at one time, but it was just, it was created for them.
Mm.
Now they've got to create it themselves. And so that's what comes to mind for me.
No, I appreciate it. The reason, one, I think it's a continuing question that a lot of people have, and just wanting to address the problem. But selfishly, me and another colleague are working on a paper to submit, maybe by the end of the year, but looking at the transition piece specifically, and all the different components that go into it. And you definitely hit on several that we've talked about. There's actually a term my colleague introduced me to called middlescence. You familiar with that?
No.
It's basically like a second adolescence. And so going back to Erickson's work, if you think about what is it, identity versus role confusion, or identity I think that's what it is. I should know. But the 8 stages that Erickson basically says that psychologically we move through, and specifically that late teenage years before you become an adult, you're in this process of, figuring out who your peers are as you guys are navigating, puberty, but then also who are you going to become. And obviously, the military has this beautiful, like, well, this is who you are. You're a ranger, and this is what we do, and here's the culture, and everything you just discussed, it's given. But then when it ends, right? The trick is exactly what you said. You are now in charge. But it's, for many of them, they go through this second adolescence where, boom, they're left with like, who am I? Where are my peers? Where are my tribe? Who am I going to become in this next chapter in life? Not to mention any trauma or anything else. And it's actually something cross-culturally we're looking at as well. Like, hey, what are some of the suicide rates, and what are some of the depressive rates of refugees that leave their homeland?
Yeah.
And so we're actually seeing a lot of interesting stuff. I don't want to give away too much, but it's something we're super passionate about. And I think, the community, I know at large, is really interested in, learning as much as possible. And obviously there's great programs out there, the Honor Foundation and a bunch of others that, focus on transition and really helping individuals make that next step.
Yeah. 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 No, absolutely. That's super interesting with the refugee thing. And that it makes perfect sense. The older I get, the more I'm reminded of how powerful having a sense of belonging is. Like, in terms of both benefits and drawbacks, like, you familiar with the Robbers Cave experiment? Do you remember that one?
Sounds familiar. Remind me.
So that one was the one, I think that was in the 70s too. That's back when they could do really fun experiments and not worry about, ethics. But Robbers Cave, so it was, I think it was in Oklahoma. It's a state park, and I think it was Oklahoma. But researchers, they took these like 12, 13-year-old boys and took them to this camp, this like summer camp. And there were two groups. One, I think they were both like, there was like 10 or 12 in the groups. I mean, don't quote me on the details, but there were two groups. And the first week, the groups didn't know each other existed. They were completely separate from each other. They had team names. They had like a flag. They bonded in this first week. Then they introduced the groups to each other, and you can imagine what happened. And not only did they introduce them, but they started doing competitions. They had like a baseball tournament, and I think it was like the names were like the Rattlers and the Eagles. Again, I'm probably butchering the details here, but so like the Rattlers like won the baseball tournament, and the Rattlers like took their flag and like planted it on the pitch of the baseball field, and then the Eagles were like, I think they like burned the flag from the Rattlers, and then it escalated, and the researchers like created conflict. Like they made like the Eagles late for a picnic, and then they let the Rattlers like eat the food for like the Eagles food, like it. And it got to the point where the researchers who were playing counselors, they had to separate the boys because the boys were like raiding each other's cabins, and like they hated each other. And but it really speaks to this human need to belong to a group. And once you belong to that group, then all of a sudden you compare your group favorably to all other groups. Like all other groups are the enemy. And like the way that plays out negatively. I mean, not to jump into a political discussion, and I won't do that to you, but like you look at how people identify with their team politically, and the way that they shape the narrative of reality is always beneficial to their team.
Mm-hmm.
And the other team does the exact same thing. And so that's the negative, parts of it. But the positive parts are like like being a part of an organization like the SOF community, or a community like being a part of SOF. Like you have a sense of belonging to this place. You have people that understand what you've gone through and your unique experiences, and which is why I think that it's important for people who get out to be as connected, as they can. It's natural for people of this type of personality to be more socially selective and to be more on the introverted side in terms of like wanting to just kind of be to yourself or be with your families or whatever. And there's no forcing mechanism to get you out there. And I think it would be incredibly important for folks that are, like the Three Ranger Foundation's a great one. They do a great job of keeping Rangers connected with one another. They have the mentorship program and all that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's huge to try to find your tribe or whatever, and like continue to feed that part of you through being a part of these organizations. But yeah, I just feel like I don't know if it's confirmation bias or what, but like the more experiences I have in life, the more I'm like putting weight on that need to belong to a group. And the more I see it play out.
Yeah. I mean, I think it obviously gets back into the discussion of, what do you believe about the world? What do you believe about humanity? Because some of the things that obviously all humans struggle with, but specifically in this conversation, the SOF community struggle with, isn't unique to them. It's embedded in them as a part of who they are as a human. It may be exacerbated in some capacity because of, some of the struggles they go through, some of the training they go through, some of the missions that they go through, and the experiences and the sacrifices that they go through, obviously bring them so much closer. But it's a human issue for sure.
Yep, absolutely.
Well, I'm checking out the time. Anything I'd love to pick your brain about a lot of things. I know we're kind of running close to time. I want to give you time to get set up
Yeah.
for whatever you
Yeah.
got going on next. But is there anything else that you wanted to dump out or address before we wrap up?
I got a ton of stuff, but you mentioned something earlier that is relevant for me right now, and I think it would be important for people of this community to be aware of. You mentioned your background in attachment. Um, I finished a book recently called Attached. You familiar with that book?
Mm-hmm.
My training, I don't have a lot of attachment style stuff in my training. Like I had a developmental psychology class, and I remember some of the studies with infants and stuff on attachment styles, but never really used that in my work. I come from more of like a behavioral lens, you know. And so a friend of mine, a colleague of mine, recommended it to me, and I read it. And when I say life changing, like I legitimately mean life changing. I'm not exaggerating. And so for the listeners who are not familiar, um, the theory with attachment theory, and Chris, correct me if jump in because I'm sure you have a lot more experience or expertise in this than I do. But is that there's three major attachment styles. So you have someone who has an anxious attachment style, and like in relationships, there's this constant fear that the other person is gonna leave, and like there's this fear of abandonment. There's these like checking behaviors of like, do you still love me, and are you sure, and the other end of the spectrum, you have the avoidant person who their priority is to like make sure that they continue to have like freedom and independence, and like anytime they feel like that independence is being encroached upon, they withdraw and they push away, and like secretly they want attached, they want relationships with folks, but they have this tendency to just kind of be avoidant, especially as people get closer, it pushes them further away. And then you have this secured person who is someone who is kind of the happy medium. They're the person that like they're secure in their relationships with people, and there's not a irrational fear that the person is going to leave, but there's also not this like weird withdrawal when people get close and stuff. And so I say life changing for me because man, am I avoidant. I am like,
Shocker.
yeah, right. And a lot of people in the community are too,
I call them hyper
but
avoidance.
oh my God. Like to the point where there were pieces of the book where I was like, holy cow, like I didn't realize that was common to people who are avoidant. And like I thought it was just a personal thing. And so it really made it changed my lens with how I view relationships. And I've always been this way, like it's looking back on relationships through my life, like I've always been like very protective of my freedom, very like to the point where I didn't understand why I was being so cold and distant and pushing away, and so just having the understanding of the theory and the language to describe it has allowed me to recognize when I'm having these sort of what they call in the book, these deactivating strategies where I'm like pushing people away and counter them. And what's interesting is that the anxious attachment style and the avoidant are like magnets, and not good ones, like because they both bring out the worst in each other's attachment styles.
Yep.
And and that's that has rang true for me, and so anyway, you brought that up. It was relevant for me, and I think I would highly recommend people, especially from this community, to just take a look, because the way that I have the reason it was helpful for me is that when I left the military, I went down kind of a different road. Like I had a crossroads when I just chose to leave. And one road was to go down the path that I've always gone down and prioritize career first. And the other road was to do the opposite from what I normally do and prioritize relationships in my life. And I've always, when I've experienced those avoidant tendencies, for me, it's always been like a confirmation that I made the wrong decision. When that's not true. like I made the right decision. It's just I'm kind of programmed to be avoidant. And so it's allowed me to kind of, it's almost given me permission to be like comfortable with where I am in life. And when I say like impactful, it's probably one of the more impactful things that I've read, you know, in terms of like making an impact on my overall well-being. So yeah, so I wanted to bring that up because I feel like that if there's one person out there that's going through the same thing and this is something that can help them, I think it would be worth it.
Yeah, so there's actually a fourth category. So if you think of an XY coordinate, but it's actually the bottom left coordinate is secure. So 0, 0. The most secure you can be 0, 0. The higher you go vertically on the chart, the more avoidant you are. The more horizontal you go on the chart, the more preoccupied or anxious you are. And then if you get somebody that experienced some level of abuse, could be psychological, could be physical, could be sexual, they land in that top right quadrant, which is disorganized or fearful attachment. And yes, most people in this community, again, I'm working in the tails, they're on that top line. Hyper avoidance, I would call them. And it makes them really, really good at their job. Unfortunately, sometimes their spouses are up there as well, which makes them really productive as a team.
Yeah.
And they can avoid strong negative emotion, but they fail to connect a lot of times. But then to your point, yes, many, many times you get the hyper avoidant and the preoccupied or anxious attachment, and they're wrapped up together and they just fuel each other's fire. You know, she or he is clingy because they're fearful of that. You know, they find security in connection, whereas avoidance finds security in demonstrating their worth and their value in what they do. They're super focused on work, sports, politics, anything that can demonstrate their worth. Another thing I'll just throw out there to anyone listening, and this is a total what am I trying to say? Super rough understanding of it, but John Bowlby, the creator of attachment theory, basically said there's two core questions on the psyche: am I valuable or am I lovable? And then, are you, whoever you are, mom, dad, sister, auntie, uncle, whoever's taking care of me, are you capable of taking care of me? So, food, water, and shelter, obviously, but more emotionally, psychologically.
Yeah.
The thing that I love about attachment is it's flexible. There's a thing in the research called earned security. And so you could have a very preoccupied, avoidant, disorganized attachment with somebody. And if that relationship gets worked on, it can actually move into the secure quadrant. And a super easy way to check this out, and I have all my clients do this personally, just so I have a better snapshot, third party. I mean, I have my assessment of them just from our conversation, but it's yourpersonality.net. I want to say it's the University of Illinois that does it. I could be wrong. So I probably shouldn't say that, but yeah, yourpersonality.net. And you can just go on there and click the button that says, take the assessment. And it's an abbreviated attachment survey. Okay. And it also gives you your extrovert, your ocean score, or openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, neuroticism. It also gives you a narcissistic scale, which that one they added about a year, maybe 2 years ago. I don't know how valid that one is, but the attachment score is awesome. And yes, obviously, I light up when we start talking about attachment, and don't feel bad. I didn't learn about it in grad school. It was kind of a labor of love, and just through my Ph.D., one of my professors was actually taught by like a blue blood, if you will. And so he was really, and he's a licensed psychologist. He was super focused on letting us know about it. So.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Yeah, I think it's super relevant for this community, especially that that whole idea that like when the avoidant ramps up, it causes the anxious to ramp up, or vice versa. And what's interesting too is that the opposite is true too. Is that when the avoidant doesn't do the avoidant things, the anxious doesn't do the anxious things, and they actually have a more productive, relationship. And and like you said, that the attachment styles are plastic. Like they can change.
Yep.
It just takes a little bit of work, but
No,
yeah, I think it's huge.
that's something, I know I work with individuals but my training, if I'm going to, with Soft Network, there's some amazing providers. I'm going to stake my claim as like more of a couples expert. And so that's the lens I pass off to my clients. And I think what's so great about it is it's just a lens of understanding. And if you can grasp what's happening between the couple, and the couple can get that, oh, this is what's happening. I'm activating you, you're activating me. Obviously
Yeah.
we teach them about the nervous system and a better way to communicate. But so much of what we do, I feel like for me as a clinician is educate. These are super smart people. If you just give them the tools, they're going to figure it out pretty quickly if they're motivated to
Yeah.
solve the problem. But yeah, I love attachment. It's can't say enough about it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's good, and it's such a simple theory. I mean, I don't know. I was gonna say a simple theory. There's complexity to it, but it's so easy to understand because I think it's so apparent when you have the language, when you understand, when you're taught it, and then you're like, holy cow, yeah, that's exactly what's going on.
Yeah.
So yeah, so like return on investment there, I think would be huge.
It also, I tell this to all my students and my clients. It helped change the world. The reason, or one of the main reasons, we don't have orphanages in this country anymore, and in first world, second world countries, we have adoption and foster care. It's because of attachment theory, which is super interesting. But hey, man, I know we're running short on time. I could go on for another hour or two on attachment. Anything else before we wrap up? I definitely want to circle back and catch up again.
Yeah, no, I think we covered almost everything I wanted to talk about. I got plenty of other stuff if you ever want to do a second one.
Absolutely.
There's something that's been on my mind lately. Are you familiar with interoception?
No.
All right, so I'll give you a preview, and then
Yeah.
maybe it's something we could set up for next time. So there's a researcher here at Auburn University near where I live. April Smith is her name. She does research on this idea of interoception. So interoception is the sense of the internal state of your body. So if you have lots of interoception, you're aware of your heart beating fast when it's beating fast, or you're aware when you're hungry or sleepy or whatever. Soft organizations through training tend to train a lack of interoception, and I experienced that firsthand when I don't know if it was Ranger School or SEER School, but I remember afterwards kind of having the realization of like, man, like I don't really feel hungry like I once did. Like I eat because it's time to eat and because it's aligned with my fitness goals. But I mean, it's easy to go like a full day without food just because, like if the situation necessitates or creates it or requires it. The interesting thing about interoception with Dr. Smith's research is that lower levels of interoception is linked to a higher risk of suicide. And the nice thing about interoception is it's plastic as well. You can train yourself to be more interoceptive, mainly through like mindfulness-based meditation. And yeah, I just want to throw that out there because it's something that's been on my mind because it's a personal, thing for me too. Because I'm like, holy crap, like like I'm not very in tune with what's going on internally for me, and so it's got me questioning. Like, I wonder what would happen if we trained soft individuals to be more interoceptive. If we had like a mindful-based meditation like program that we would send them through, or whatever. I wonder what could happen in terms of like reducing suicide risk or just, I mean, man, like all the things that people complain about being estranged from others and not being as socially connected and all that, like so just throwing that out there on your radar, just something to kind of chew on. Or shoot, if you want to talk about it now, I'm good with it. But
Yeah,
yeah.
my initial gut is like that's going to be a double-edged sword, and I have no idea. This is just total off the cuff, but I would think if there is a more in tune operator, that they would be much more apt to be engaged with the family, that they would be more able to take a knee when they need to take a knee, etc. But I wonder if there's an adverse effect on the other side
Mhm.
of they're not going to push themselves in certain situations because they're so aware internally of what's going on. Or is
Yeah.
it a dial that they can dial that down?
Yeah. Maybe
And
so.
when they're at home, they dial it up, but when they
Yeah.
go to work, they're dialing it down.
Yeah.
Um, that's super interesting.
That would be the ideal scenario, is what you
Right.
just said, the dial, because it's adaptive. It's
Right.
adaptive to be able to ignore pain and discomfort. Um, but when you get home, it's not. When you're completely numb to what's going on around you, it's not adaptive at all. It's maladaptive. So to
Yeah.
have that ability to control that, I think would be a huge game changer. Um, so yeah.
You know who would be, well, I would assume would be good test individual. Who does she do her research with? Have you looked at, like, read that closely on her
hmm
studies?
Yeah, I actually just reviewed a protocol for the military. I was one of the reviewers. So they're working with they're working with somebody, Army researcher, I think from Walter Reed Army Institute of Research. But they had a grant that might have gotten pulled. I'm not really sure. I haven't talked to her lately. With all the stuff that's going on, the grant funding getting pulled, it might have been on the chopping block. But they had a grant with the military and to do this. I don't think they had hammered out the population for it yet. I had some recommendations on that, because there's what I would not want to happen is this to turn into something like, I don't know if you're familiar with the master resiliency training. Um, I know the Army did. I don't know if the other branches did, but it's basically CBT techniques. It's good
Mm-hmm.
stuff,
Yeah.
but the way they rolled it out was poor.
Hmm.
They made everybody who PCS had to go through like a multi-day training of it, and so it was a mandated thing. People hated doing it. It created a bunch of antibodies really
Yeah.
for the things that we want people to do. And so I would hate for something like this to go down the same path of that. And so that was recommendations I was making to, you know, be a little more deliberate with who you apply this to and how you do it, because I think there's a lot of value, to it. But the short of it is I don't know what population exactly they're applying it to.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, you could go either route. Would you want people that are more naturally or trained to be, I'll just use hyper aware because I don't, what was the term that she calls it?
Interoceptive.
Interoceptive. People
Yeah.
that are high on interoceptive. And I would assume, clinicians are pretty high on interoceptive.
Mhm.
Um, and even though it's not apples to apples, but when they get into a clinical session, their ability to compartmentalize or detach from everything else besides that session,
Yeah.
um, that would be interesting. Obviously, if you went the military route as well, you've got the avoidant individual or the ability to compartmentalize, and then you just have to train them to be higher on interoceptive. But
Mhm.
even a comparison of two populations would be super interesting there.
Yep. I agree. I
That's
agree.
cool. No, I would agree. It's something. I mean, I think for the last 10 years, I've been, as a civilian on my side. I don't know what you guys are doing on your side. So there's always like, why aren't they doing this? Why aren't they doing this? And absolutely, I thinking about it more after the last couple of minutes of you saying it, I would assume it's like a dial that individuals in the right setting with the right tools, they can turn up that skill
Yeah.
or they can turn it down. Um, And absolutely, I think the longevity of the operator would be increased, because on things that, hey, I want to go look at this or unpack this, they unpack it, process it, EMDR, prolonged exposure, whatever they want to use. They get to a point where they're like, yep, I'm good with that. They're dropping that out of their ruck, and they're not carrying that moving forward, which means they're going to have better ability to cognitively perform longer, but hopefully physically as well.
Yep. Yeah. You're exactly right. And maybe they detect or prevent injury more, where they're more in tune with like, hey, something's off.
Right.
I need to, take a knee and check this out first. Or, you've probably seen this. I've seen countless examples of guys experiencing psychological symptoms somatically, where they, they're having like, supraventricular tachycardia, if heart's 190 for no reason and they can't figure out what it is, and cardiology checks everything out and they're like, there's nothing physical here, there's something going on stress wise, and the guys are like telling you cognitively, I'm fine, like I'm not anxious or anything, but I feel like it could prevent a lot of these things. So I don't know, I'm excited about it. I think it has a lot of potential. Hopefully there's enough support for it, and we can maybe see it implemented in some places.
Yeah, if you've got any information, more information, shoot me a file or whatever. I'd love to dig into that. Or if not, I got her name. I'll definitely dig into that, because that's super cool.
Yeah. Happy to connect you with her. I know her. I've gone and done a few things for like some presentations at Auburn, and met her, that way. So happy to connect you guys if you want to, warm handoff kind of thing.
Yeah, that'd be cool. Hey, total off the subject, but I got to ask, Auburn or Alabama fan, or
oh man,
you knew it was coming. You knew it was coming.
Yeah. You're this will be the third thing that gets me in trouble. All right. So in the state of Alabama, you're either born into an Alabama family or an Auburn family. All right, it's just in your blood. I was born into an Alabama family. And so, yep. And I have to be quiet around here saying that, because I'm in Auburn, Opelika, right? So like I have been conditioned to hate the color orange, and I still won't pair orange and blue in an outfit or whatever. My wife has made it her mission to make me an Auburn fan. And so she loves to brag that I have been to more Auburn football games than I have Alabama football games. And I've been to, basketball, gymnastics, like I've been to a lot of these events. And what's interesting is I think it's starting to work. Like I'm starting to find myself sort of like I saw, where was I? I was, I was on a trip. I think I was in Virginia Beach, and I passed a guy in an Auburn shirt, and to connect with him,
you said War Eagle.
I said War Eagle. Chris, can you believe it? And after I said it, I was like, what did I just say?
Your family would disown you, man.
Yeah. And I just told them myself. So if any of them are listening, I'm going to get a phone call right after, and some chastising. But yeah.
No, there was I think it was Evan Hafer from Black Rifle Company. He was on Joe Rogan's, and I haven't forgot this ever since. He said one of his buddies had told him there's nothing more contagious than psychology. And having a sports background myself, and going to a lot of different, whatever games that, my buddy invited me to this game. I don't have a dog in the fight. And then you're in that stadium or around those people long enough. There's something about like everybody's energy. You find yourself kind of root for this team or whatever. Unless you completely hate them, but I don't fault you for it.
Yeah. I like that quote. I like that a lot. I'm going to use that. Nothing more contagious than psychology. It's very true.
Yeah, I was going to give you crap because I grew up, and I'm a diehard Michigan fan. So we just been drilling Ohio State, as well as we've gotten Alabama twice. So, but I hear you. Auburn's not bad. Actually, the very first, I think that was my first SEC game. It was opening weekend 2006. Auburn played LSU, number 2 in the country, and Auburn upset them. That was a sweet game. It came down to the last play.
Okay, awesome.
That was also. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say there is, with SEC games, like there is nothing boring, like it's always an exciting. I mean, college football in general, like the outcome can always go either way,
Right.
for the most part. But those games, man, they're always a good time.
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to say that was also my first introduction to a real Alabama fan. And this was that was actually, I think, the year you guys got Saban, but you didn't have Saban yet. I think that came on the tail end of that season, but so you guys were terrible.
Oh, I remember those years.
And we were leaving the Auburn LSU game driving, and there was some kid, some teenager in an Alabama jersey just screaming and yelling at all these Auburn fans. And I was just like, okay, I guess that's an Alabama fan.
Yep. Yep. I mean, that's that social identity theory that we were talking about earlier, that tribalism. Like you can see it play out big time down here. Like people will get into physical fights over their team, which is just wild.
Or poison trees.
Oh my God. Oh man. Yeah, you're exactly right. Yeah, and it feels like the less. All right, a fourth thing that's gonna get me in trouble. The less intelligent the person is, the more susceptible they are to falling into that, that tribalism kind of piece, like the tree poisoning kind of incident, which was just awful.
It was wild. All right, man. I have actually got to run. My little boy's got a birthday celebration at school. We're gonna take off, but
good.
Yeah, man. Love the conversation. We'll definitely have to do it again. Okay.
Yeah. No, thanks for having me, Chris. Yeah. And if you need anything else, feel free to reach out.
Thanks for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe wherever you're watching or listening. And please share this content with your networks.